All right, I want to go now to Paul Kelly, Editor-at-Large at the Australian newspaper. Paul, thank you for joining me this morning. If we can perhaps just start by picking up on the George Pell comments. Christina Keneally there launching quite a strong line of attack against Archbishop Comensoli in particular for maintaining that his view is Cardinal Pell is innocent, that the victim may have been a matter of mistaken identity, been abused by someone else, he's got the wrong guy and so on. Christina Keneally saying that really does add to the further hurt for all victims. Paul, you have written about George Pell and this appeal that was lost during the week this weekend. You agree it is still an unsettled matter. Why?
I think the 2-1 decision against George Pell is most unsatisfactory, David. I've read the entire judgment of the majority and the minority, and I think the minority argument by Mark Weinberg, widely recognised as the most distinguished criminal jurist of his generation, is a very tightly reasoned, forensic and persuasive argument that Pell should have been acquitted. And this document, this minority judgment now, if you like, sits on the judicial table. It's there. It can't be ignored. People can't pretend that it doesn't exist. And essentially, what it's saying is that the case against George Pell is not proved beyond reasonable doubt. It really, I think, significantly undermines the assumptions of the prosecution in the trials and the judgment of the majority in this Court of Appeal decision. And I'd go further than that. It's impossible to read this judgment without forming the view that there are now fundamental issues at stake about the integrity of the criminal justice system in Victoria.
But Paul, I mean, you give a lot of significance and weight to that judgment, eminent jurist, as you say, Justice Weinberg. But what about the other two? He couldn't convince the other two. Are they not equally as significant? The Chief Justice and the President of the Appeals Court, who had a very different view.
Well, we can't really have a debate about the credentials of the judges. I mean, clearly, this decision must be respected as a majority decision of the Court of Appeal. You're completely right, David, to say that Weinberg could not persuade the other two judges. But I think this leaves us in a most unsatisfactory situation. There are many, many people who've already read the Weinberg judgment who have grave doubts about the case against Pell. This is a very powerful judgment, and it argues, I think, in a very convincing way that the case is not proved beyond reasonable doubt. And this won't go away. You can't have this, minority judgment on the table and pretend it doesn't exist. It does exist, and I think it can't be ignored.
One suspects this still has a way to go and will end up in the High Court. We'll see. Look, Scott Morrison marking his first anniversary yesterday. I mentioned earlier he's not really doing a lot of song and dance about this, making no comment at all, essentially. But there he is in France at the G7 alongside the world's most powerful leaders. It's not where many thought he would be 12 months ago. What sort of Prime Minister do you think has emerged in Scott Morrison? And Paul, what are some of the things you think he might still need to work on?
Well, it's been an extraordinary and fascinating story as far as Scott Morrison's concerned. He's right not to be celebrating this anniversary. This is the anniversary of a brutal and bloody Liberal Party coup. The real turning point for Scott Morrison was the election in May. If he hadn't won the election in May, there'd be no anniversary here anyway. I think in terms of what sort of Prime Minister he is, well, we've seen signs of this already. He is a down-to-earth, community-based Prime Minister who does have a capacity to relate to the people. He's very different to either Tony Abbott or Malcolm Turnbull. He is governing from the middle. He lacks Abbott's ideological aggression, and he has the capacity to appeal to Conservative voters, which Malcolm Turnbull couldn't do. He has got the capacity now to reshape and repair the Liberal Party very substantially. I note that John Howard says the Liberal Party is now in its best condition since 2007. Well, we'll see how that plays out. Morrison has great authority. There is no challenger. He has a very close relationship with his deputy, Josh Frydenberg, and Morrison is thinking long term. A lot of people have been confused by the fact that he didn't have a substantial agenda. Not having a substantial agenda was fundamental to his election victory. What he's doing now is, in terms of virtually everything he approaches, the thinking is long term. He's attempting to put down governing roots with a new and united Liberal Party. Now, he's got a lot of challenges, there's no doubt about that. But I think that he's also got really significant opportunities.
Paul Kelly, Editor-at-Large of the Australian newspaper. Thanks so much for joining us this morning. We'll catch up soon.
Thanks, David.